Good, welcome everyone. It is 10:30, so I welcome you all to the 165th meeting of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee. We have COVID-19 requirements to adhere to. While we're in this part of the meeting, we are fine as we are. When our internal consultants come in to give their report on internal audits, we will be required to put our face masks on as they are not part of our team. So I just notify you of that in advance. So thank you all for your attendance this morning, and I will ask Claire Mackay for a karakia.
Kia ora, I'll do whakatakataho this morning. Whakatakataho, kiti ulu, whakatakataho, kiti tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, ki mā taratara ki tai. Ihi aki ana te atakura, hei tiu, hei hoka, hei hohu, ti hei Māori.
Thank you for that. We now move to apologies. I have one from Megan Hands as a committee member. Are there any other apologies? If there are not, we note that. Are there any conflicts of interest? There are none. We have no requests for public forum, deputations or petitions. So we then will very shortly move to item 5.1, the outstanding actions report from previous meetings. So I just make the point that we have a very full agenda, both in the public and the public excluded. And whilst we have 2.5 hours of time, I would like to think that we could move through reasonably reasonably quickly, just to keep us going, because 2.5 hours is a long session. And online we have today Jan Cranwell from this committee, and any other committee members? And Nicole Marshall, thank you. It's a good start. Lost my memory already. Giles, first item is on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report that we will be bringing as a standing item, which will record the outstanding actions from previous meetings, so that we have a record of items that are need to be addressed and when they're closed. The only comment I would make on the report is just to highlight that under 6.6, where it says an extraordinary council meeting, it's not an extraordinary meeting. I believe it's just a standard meeting of the council. Other than that, happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee? If not, then could I please have someone move that we receive the outstanding actions report based on unconfirmed minutes of previous Audit and Risk Committee meetings. Chair Yui, seconded by, I was going to say G1, I see. Graham McGlynn. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. We move then to item 5.2. Outstanding actions from external reviews. Again, Giles.
Again, we intend to bring this as a standing item, which we will include all critical external reviews, as well as external audit. Will include internal audit recommendations and actions and other external reviews that we believe are worthy of monitoring their completion for the committee to have assurance that we're taking the actions that need to be taken. In relation to the report, the only comment I have to make is, since the report was completed, the 2 repayments outstanding is now 1. There is still 1 repayment to be reclaimed, and I know that the Chief Executive is in contact with the councillor or ex-councillor concerned.
Any questions from committee members? None. I just note that the physical verification of inventory and the capital assets is a question that has been raised, and the remainder is not insignificant but somewhat minor, and that the major works have been done and that work is continuing. So if there are no further questions, could I have someone please move that we receive the outstanding actions from previous external reviews and internal audit? Councillor Mackay, seconded. Councillor Edge. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. We move then to risk, item 6.1. who is speaking to that, guys?
Chair, the standard report on health and safety metrics in response to questions raised at previous audit committee meetings, we have provided clear evidence of the mitigations taken against those risks that have been highlighted as extreme and critical or highly probable, and believe that they are mitigated effectively so that people are not undertaking work in unduly risky circumstances. Clearly, those issues are continually kept under review. Also providing evidence of the next level of risk category down to demonstrate that the risks that are presented to the committee are currently the inherent risks rather than the residual. Be assured that the organisation, myself, Stephanie, the executive team, take health and safety extremely seriously, and as previously communicated to the committee, confirming that we will be undertaking a fundamental review using an external supplier to look at our approach to health and safety to make sure that we continue to build on the great work that's been done to date, but recognising that we can always do more in this space. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from members?
Through you, Chair. Under the surface water science and the refresher courses being completed every 2 years, do staff think that's sufficiently frequent?
My understanding is that in consultation with the relevant director and the areas of the business and the health and safety expertise, that we believe that that's appropriate at this time, but we can always keep these things under review.
Thank you.
Councillor Kai.
Mine's around, I just want the definition of a stilling well. It talks about atmosphere testing, combined space hazards and confined space entry. So I'm just about, I don't know what a stilling well is, if somebody could just explain that. Thank you.
Tim Davey.
Thank you, Chair. A stilling well is you often see them beside the rivers. It's where we're measuring the river level, and there's a large pipe that is the water is still within it. So it's the area. You have it beside the river, and then you're measuring the level within it. And what happens is the silt builds up at the bottom, so you have to get in and dig that out. So that's it. The risk is of getting into this confined space to dig it out. And perhaps, Chair, if I could just comment on the previous thing about the training, that was on the advice of an external trainer that every 2 years was sufficient. So.
Thank you, Tim. Chair Yui.
So I have two questions. One is, would it be useful to know how often these things like entering stilling wells and hanging off cliffs and things like that are actually happening? Because wouldn't the risk level will multiply the more staff are doing it. So we can't really see how often that's happening, but also we've got a little bit about these 15 tasks, but the number of staff, the number of times it's actually happening, I think would be useful. And I don't know, but have staff considered whether that would be useful. My second question is related to, have we considered the questions around, or does this happen, around the use of Robinson R44 helicopters?
Through you, Chair. Yes, Chair Huey. When the Robinson issue emerged a number of years ago, we took the action that we would not utilise them. They are part of the procurement, that they are actually excluded from use, and we have no reason to return to them given the current position within the country on those.
Thanks very much. And I've had a similar question around the use of quad bikes. I mean, it looks like we're not using quad bikes very often, and we've got people trained, but you know, overseas jurisdictions, some places you can't use quad bikes at all. So have we looked at that? I suggest that we should. Anyway, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
Chair Huey, in response to the question of frequency, it's certainly something we can consider as we continue to develop the reporting, which will be part of the work that we're doing over the next few months.
Becky Southworth.
Thank you. So I'll follow with the, I've got two questions and I'll go with the quad bike one first, which is that I know there's Pamu had an investigation post unfortunately a fatality, and they have gone to using quad bikes only that have frames and also have a GPS system that goes off and there's an alert if it tips. So I'm just wondering, those are measures that they've implemented post that investigation. I just wonder if that's something extra we've got, recognising that in that case we minimise their use. And then the other one is around the lone remote worker training. Would it be correct to think that lone remote workers won't be working remotely alone in a more hazardous type of activity? Do they, under those circumstances, would they pair up?
Catherine Parbrow.
Yes, so for quad bikes, we do have frames around and we aren't using them as often as we would normally use them. We tend to now use motorbikes. So that's our preference, is to always use a motorbike.
And the second question?
That was about lone working. So yeah, if it's a more hazardous activity, is lone working avoided, and the lone worker training is for those lower risk activities when it seems appropriate to be alone, or can you have people working hazardously alone? How does that?
Well, I can answer that and Nick, come in if there's anything extra to add. But there are two parts to it. In the lone worker policy, and the way that it's implemented is we have it so that if it is a riskier enterprise, then they're calling in more frequently. So that it becomes, every hour or even less than that if it's required. And then if it is, there is an assessment done, and a good example is during floods when nobody would ever go out on their own. So we make sure that if it is a really high risk, they would never go out on their own.
Fabulous.
Thank you, Charles.
Sorry, through you, Chair. In relation also to lone workers in risky situations, not just in terms of the environment they're operating, but the people that they may be meeting in terms of irate ratepayers or landowners, then risk assessments will be completed. And obviously staff should, if our advice is that if staff feel at all unsafe, they should consider not attending, or they should take somebody with them, or potentially be accompanied by the police in certain circumstances.
Grant McGlynn.
Through you, Chair. Two questions, just a confirmation that the review that is being envisaged actually covers the mental well-being as well as the physical injury side. The reports have for a long time focused on accidents as opposed to potential mental injury.
I can confirm that the review will consider that. We're acutely aware of the increasing health and safety risk around mental well-being, particularly given the environment that we're working in COVID. Obviously, we're taking a number of actions specifically in relation to COVID, but the wider review will consider the links between health and safety, well-being, and security, which are ultimately different ways often of looking at the same issue.
If I may have the supplementary question or comment, really, is that in my past I was a ski patroller and undertook pre-hospital emergency care, which is quite a reasonably in-depth first aid, and that becomes a very good mitigator to risks when you're out in those environments, because you become more acutely aware of protecting yourself as well as being there if indeed something happens. And I'm wondering what level of training there is in this area for our staff that are particularly working remotely or not necessarily on their own, but in high risk environments where, regular first aid may not be immediately available.
I am aware that many people in the organisation either have voluntarily undertaken first aid training or required to undertake first aid training as part of their role on a regular basis. I'm not aware of the depth, but I know that Tim will provide more detail, but I'm also aware that at a workshop we're running with the executive team on Monday around the risks that have been identified for the health and safety year just started. Health and safety will be a focus of that conversation. I mean, first aid will be a focus of that conversation.
Tim.
And through you, Chair, the other side to this is we do run for field workers a specialised field worker first aid course, which is very much about if you're on your own, what first aid can you do on your own as a lone worker, as well as some of those more risk assessment type exercises. So I suspect it's probably not to the level that you're talking about from a ski patrolling perspective, but it is a specialised first aid course for field workers.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, with the rapid development of drone technology recently, is council regularly looking at opportunities to replace the use of working at height or helicopters with the use of drones?
You go first.
I can tell you that yes, we are looking at it. We do assess it regularly as part of how we measure. At the moment, there is in the monitoring that we're doing, there is nothing that would be able to be done by a drone that in the way that we measure it. But it is certainly an assessment that we're looking at all of the time. But we're also developing a policy around, or there is a policy around drone usage, because there are obviously a lot of controls around that as well.
Stephanie, you're fine. Are there any further questions on this paper? If not, then could I have someone please move the recommendations that are on the screen, save me reading them all out. Thank you. Grant Hedge, Councillor Southworth, second. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carries. We move then to item 6.2, COVID recovery projects. Giles, Nick.
Morena, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity just to introduce this paper, which covers the series of projects that we've councillors undertaking that was funded by central government to support COVID recovery in the economy. There's probably just 3 points that I'd draw your attention to in the paper. Firstly, on the table 8 on page 30 of your papers, we've noted that unfortunately that doesn't include a key aiding the interpretation of the status of those projects. What the colours that we've used there would sort to reflect those using our level of service reporting, which for green is no issues. The yellow is where we've got some concerns regarding delivery, either in timeframes or scope of those projects, and a red would be where an existing commitment may not be met or wouldn't be met. So that will be corrected for the next iteration of this paper. The second point I'd just like to make, and certainly would be keen to get feedback from councillors on this, just regarding the climate change impacts. We've noted there that, in putting together this paper, we noted that whilst the projects themselves had inherent climate change implications, because a lot of the work was in either flood recovery or managing spread of pest species, that the delivery of the contractual projects to government requirements, we didn't sort of see a direct climate impact of those, a direct climate change impact of those. So, but we're happy to have that interpretation just tested or corrected with the committee. The third point I'd like to raise is that what we have included as attachments to this paper are copies of the reporting that we do to the different funding agencies and that we use internally. Now, we note that provides a much richer picture of the work that's being undertaken and the status of that, but also note that it adds significantly to the meeting packs that comes through to this committee. So we'd be keen to take guidance from the committee as to whether they'd like to have those attached for every meeting or on a periodic basis. look, we're certainly happy through the chair to take questions on the report.
Chair, I noticed table 8, the amber items. The key says contract delivery issues or funding. There are nil against contract issues, but what are the funding issues that are existing with those projects?
I might just come back just to ensure that I understand the question correctly. That particularly refers to the column on the right-hand side, contract deliverable issues not agreed with funding agency. So this is where we've gone back. That's to indicate where we have yet to, or if we haven't secured the agreement of the funding agency regarding a change in deliverables or timing of those projects. So for those ones in orange that I'll just refer to, that we have had some concerns with that delivery and time frame. For example, the Horswell Buratini weed barrier is one that if we miss the timing window, we drop back a whole year. And that's one that we would have to go back to the NB in that case to make sure that they're sort of comfortable with that. In all cases to date, with the delays, say for the Rangatata and Waia, have been disclosed, and NB are comfortable with those. So that our funders are comfortable with the status of those projects as they are in terms of delivery. So not sure if that's quite answered the question.
No, it hasn't. Maybe I'll put it a different way. I'm aware that some of these contracts are incurring cost risks elsewhere. Does ECAN have any cost risk exposure with these amber rated projects?
Not with those amber rated projects. At this time, we're comfortable that we'll deliver within the costing allocated or contracted from those funding agencies.
Brenton.
Through your chair, just a point of clarification on table 1 on page 33 of 136. Second to bottom item, the Waia Township Stock Bank was expected to be completed by the end of October. We're now in November. What's the current status?
I've only got the reports in from, so I've only yet to collate the end of October report. So this obviously was collated a month prior. That's all, I think, apart from some seeding, that all of the groundworks have been completed on that. So it's within, if not completed, it could be close to being a matter of days away.
So just to clarify, that the issue on the Waia was access to land with private landowners to get to a space, and we've resolved those and the work has continued. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Grant Edge.
Thanks for this report. Yeah, I find it really valuable. I particularly like the little summaries that were being given with a photograph and an explanation of where you're at. And because our meetings are quite a few weeks apart, having this reported at those meetings, I think it's a good idea. Actually, we were talking before about use of drones, and I was looking at the Ashley River Rakahuri one, and having a drone view or a drone update for records would be actually quite an interesting way of, especially for our communities, to know what's going on with some of our projects. So it might be worth something to think about. The only other comment for me was there's some references to some site-specific stuff like Site 4 and Site 2 and the statement of works, and really got no oversight of what they might be or where they might be. So it's kind of just a little bit more referencing would be good, but otherwise I think it's really, really good. My question really is the Horswell weed barrier project. In terms of its location, does it, because it's quite a long river and presumably weed is being controlled all the way along, I know years ago, I used to watch people in boats pushing weed that had cut down into the centre of the river. The river would take it along, and they used to collect it at the cutting, the Horseville cutting. But so, yeah, how is that working? Where, how many of these things do you actually need along the river to do that?
We just need the one. So the way that the weed is controlled in the Horseville River, we have a specialist boat, a weed cutting boat that travels upstream cutting weed on a periodic basis that drifts downstream, and we catch it at a barrier and mechanically remove it. And so this particular structure would be a permanent structure. We put in place a temporary structure to capture that weed when that process is being undertaken. And it's a pretty unsatisfactory way of doing it. It takes a lot of time to set up, and it's a fairly hackery sort of a thing. So this would be a permanent structure. It'll have improved health and safety benefits for the operators. But it is a standard location, and so we can have the machinery there to help excavating that material.
And if I can just add, the challenge and timing there is around biodiversity, bird nesting, inanga stuff. So there's a very clear window when that work can happen. So that's probably the greatest challenge of putting it in place in this calendar year. Vicky.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really like the report and the pictures. Pleased to hear that the Waio embankment is going to be seeded, because it looks a bit bald in the picture. But it does. I'm then thinking, since there's been a delay and the seeding is now about to happen, and we're about to go into the dry period, is there a maintenance regime in place that will be able to ensure the seeds survive, or yeah, does it have a knock-on effect?
Through the chair, look, that's the exact question that we face from the community at Waio. That currently resembles the M3 motorway sort of situation at the moment. Look, I'm sure that it's a relatively minor expense should we need to go and reseed later. If it's drilled into the surface, we'd certainly expect to still get germination. So, but yeah, look, it is one that we'll obviously keep an eye on, and because it will be dust issues for the township, for the camping ground nearby as well, which would be a concern. So we'll have staff keep an eye on that.
Thank you. I think we have 3 questions along here that I'd like to move along if we could. Graham McGlynn, work backwards.
Through the chair, pages 56, 57 on wallaby control and wilding conifer control. Key risk you noted there is COVID. It may be an unfair question given the government announcements were only yesterday, but do you see any impact from moving to the traffic light system, presumably beginning of December, and how is compared with the risks that you're noting within the current reports?
Through the chair, look, there's a piece of work going on at the moment, and also it's a subject that's being raised at the governance group, the Wilding Conifer governance group next week, as a discussion, and also requirements around vaccination status for the varying contracting firms that we have. So it is an active discussion at the moment. So I don't have a particular. There's been no further concerns raised other than what was in that report regarding traffic light system, but it's an active discussion, and we can report back at the next committee meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Just quickly, I like this report. I'd like to see the 23 rivers somewhere listed in the briefing paper that goes with it. And I just, with respect to the question that Nick asked around the climate change, I think that information's in our briefing papers. This is a public facing document now. So for me, it satisfies our requirement, and considering that these were funded through long-term plan or discussions.
Thanks for the report. It's very well set out. It's a very good report. I'd like you to know something good that I saw. I saw a Scene 1 Say So sign on a paddock gate near Lake Clearwater, and no, they don't have wallabies up there, but they're glad they've got the sign, and one has been spotted at some stage. But anyway, more bigger picture question. Have we got a sort of priority delivery status somehow against these projects in terms of our reputation for delivery with the government? And my second question is along the lines of what Councillor Vicky just raised around these plants, and we're doing quite a big regeneration, you know, around the berms with the plantings. Not only are they going to survive the summer, but we're just writing to the government about reducing carbon emissions with planting natives. And you know, have we considered, are they going to be eaten by predators as soon as we plant them? Because that'd be a good front page story if that happened. So are we taking pests into consideration when we're doing these plantings?
Two-legged ones as well.
Yeah, and people as well.
Through Chair, and I might need to just get sort of clarification on the first question in terms of reputation or reputation for delivery on these projects. I think there's a very high awareness that these projects are not only publicly visible, but the government who's provided this funding has put a huge amount of reputation in terms of the economic recovery and employment opportunities that are that were expected to be delivered through them. I know that within the organisation, these are regarded as high risk, high reputational risk projects, and for this reason, there's a specific reporting put in place. And I know that they are given critical KPIs for a number of staff in the organisation in terms of delivery of these. The flood protection projects in particular are also, staff note that these are probably exemplar projects to provide central government confidence of co-funding and supporting this type of infrastructure. And so that's a further reason why staff have regard these as hugely significant reputational projects for this organisation in Wellington. With regards to planting, absolutely, there's a significant best practice, and our biodiversity folk have been working in native regeneration for a number of times and have extensive sort of best practice, which is also picked up by the teams that are doing it. And so those folk are also the people providing the advice and support for the flood protection and COVID projects as well in that biodiversity space. So, we've got an extensive best practice, not only in terms of planning and establishing, but also the maintenance. So there's a significant, for establishment of extensive native plantings, is an extensive maintenance period required, which is also included in the budgets for this week.
Thank you, Nick. I think we'll draw this one to a close unless there are any other really burning questions. Chief.
Apologies, Chair. If I might just take a moment to skite about the staff in the context of Chair Huey's question with regard to the prioritisation on the river engineering piece. You'll be aware that Basil Chamberlain, former Chief Executive from Taranaki Regional Council, is actually the chair of the committee that decided the funding. And when he recently visited, his comment to us was that our river engineers were actually the leaders in Aotearoa on this, and they set the standard with regard to delivery and the way that they went about this. So I just thought I'd share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, and the reporting that we have been doing has almost set the template for where the others might be. So I thank you for that. And just briefly, those reports sitting in here I find particularly useful as well. As councillors, we pick them up in varying different ones, but to have the full summary here I think is helpful, and I think it also provides context for our independent directors who are not always aware of the information. So as an information piece, I'm really happy that they are there. So could I please then have someone move that we note the paper on COVID recovery projects, including the overview of the current status of Environment Canterbury's COVID recovery projects. A mover, Graham McGlynn, seconded by Graham Naylor. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. I'm shutting you out of discussion, but I think we've had all our conversations as we've gone along in my modified process. We move then to item 6.3, Risk Management and Local Government Office of the Auditor General Report. A magnificent tome. Giles.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, the Auditor General recently published a report on the state of risk management in local government. The executive summary is provided and the full report was made available to Council. ECAN is included as a case study within the report in a positive light. We propose to use the recommendations that are made in the report to inform our work on risk management, to build on the work that's already been done to date, and to highlight that we are making arrangements for the sector manager for the Auditor General's Office to come and talk to full council on the to this committee, sorry, on the report in more detail in terms of the work they've done and what they've found across the country.
Any questions?
Sorry, just an observation actually about the recommendations to ensure that elected members are kept up to date with training about risk management. And I think that that's really, really good. So yeah, looking forward to some upskilling in the near future, perhaps.
Thank you, Grant. And we did our exercise earlier in the year around risk management and our views. And for me, it was coming in from the cold of not really having an appreciation of what risk management is about. So we came to a conclusion, but for my mind, I'm not sure that we came to the correct conclusion and had not had some training or understandings before we entered into that process, which previous iterations of council have had. So that's a piece of work that is underway to bring training to not only council members, but again for senior executive team and staff, of a joined up conversation of how we understand the qualitative and quantitative risks associated and how we as individuals I guess look at risk and in comparison to others. So yeah, I'm pleased to see that work coming forward.
Just to follow up, I mean, it's obviously assessment of risks, and I suppose in those discussions it will also be conversations about cost benefit, almost the cost benefit analysis. The cost is a sort of a risk component, but also the risk of not doing benefits or not understanding those benefits for things as well. So that would be it.
And just to say, I definitely feel like I could do some training. I know, understand risk in some context, but we have a really broad a range of things that we have to have oversight of. To really emphasise that, I think it's important that all of the councillors, it makes that clear in here. And I wonder if this report is going to come to be presented on at this committee, that's not a committee of the whole, whether it should be flagged to all of the other members of the council that will be when that's coming, so that they can be really alerted to it.
We will certainly make sure that the full council is aware that the presentation is taking place with the Auditor General's sector manager. I welcome the positive reception to training and awareness on risk, including a number of dimensions, and also particularly covering risk appetite to reflect the different activities that the council undertakes and the different appetite that there may be to take risk in those areas.
Grant McGlynn.
Highlighting on page 63 the recommendations, this really does need to be a focus over the next 12 months. My personal observation is that risk management and local government, from my work as a previous approved auditor and now involved in 3 councils, is certainly well behind probably where it is in some of the corporates with asset bases and turnovers of a similar magnitude. So I think we do have some space to go, and we've got the additional aspect of risk management associated with public funds, which places a far higher obligation upon us. So I think this report's very helpful, and I think I'd like to see in 12 months' time that we have made substantial progress.
Thank you. If there are no further points, then I would ask someone please move that we receive the report of the Office of the Auditor General and notes that Environment Canterbury will be utilising the recommendations made. Graham Naylor and Grant Edge moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We move then to item 7.1, finance. Public transport finance update. He is. Stuart, I see, is online.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. Just take the paper as read. A couple of things I'd like to focus on in the project updates area. It's been a while since this paper was written. A few things have changed. So real-time information on page 69 is a list of the project updates. In October, we completed a transition to the new real-time information system in the interchange, and that's gone very successfully. So that piece of work has now been completed. Particular interest to people in the community has been the driver wages adjustments. We concluded engagements with all of our operators in October, and so that has now been completed as well. So we've completed negotiations and contracts and arrangements with all of our operating parties. Down the page, there's a project we're working on around EV transition, and you'll note it mentions there we're expecting 20 new EVs to be on our network by the end of this year. So 7 of those are now in operation on the Orbiter route, and a significant number will be coming online later this month. So some good progress being made there. I'd also like to quickly bring your attention in the risk area on page 70, bus driver retentions. So we're starting to experience operational issues now with driver shortages for one of our operators, resulting in a small number of our trips not operating at the moment. So we are engaged with that operator to try and understand how we might mitigate that situation, recognising that with a very tight labour market and no immigration at the moment, it's particularly challenging in the recruitment space in this area at the moment, and so that's not helping us or not helping that operator to recruit new drivers. So we're working with that operator to try and understand how we can minimise the impact on the community. It's a very complex situation, combining resources with rosters, with timetables, etc. So we hope to have a solution to removing the impact on the community early in the new year. But the driver shortage is likely to continue for some time in our estimation. Any questions?
Vicky, followed by Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Question on, not sure how to refer, on page 66, there's a small table that has patronage and fare box recovery. And I just noticed that the patronage is down by 21%, whilst the fare box recovery is only down by 14%. So does that give us some indication of which parts of our patronage are particularly missing on the, like, you know, have gone from our service? Does it, are there some, you know, why the discrepancy there?
I don't have a direct answer to that question, unfortunately. It'll likely be relating to the ratio of adult versus child trips, I would suggest, and the different fares that we collect.
And then second question, and I agree, that was my pondering whether the school's being closed down affected that. And then the second question is just a clarification on page 67. There's a graph showing patronage of comparing Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington. And can I just clarify that there's a green axis on the right hand side and a black text in black on the left hand side? Am I right in thinking the green axis on the right hand side only corresponds to the Christchurch patronage figures, and the black, is that how that's set up? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. So the green axis on the right relates to the green line, which is for Christchurch buses. And the reason we've done that is because the patronage in the Greater Wellington and Auckland catchments is significantly more than Christchurch. Our squiggly line wouldn't show if we had the same axis for all three.
Unless you used a bigger bit of the page.
Yeah, that's right. But it would be harder to see the relativities and the trends.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your report, Stuart. I just want to ask you, and this is on page 70, Stuart, in relation to the COVID response. And I'm impressed that, in fact, your team have been focused on requirement for masks for school services. My question really is a wider one around our policy around and responsibility around that. So it's really just given that the contractors will have health and safety requirements, what is our responsibility really, in terms of accountability, to ensure that in fact those obligations are being met around COVID? And is there not some, given that COVID is already here, is there not some potential reputational risk for us around this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so we have articulated to council on a number of occasions the expectations and requirements of government around mask compliance with transport. And so, as we've noted, it is personal responsibility to comply with mask compliance on public transport. From a health and safety point of view, the operators, as you say, have health and safety obligations, and they are also advised of the mask compliance requirements and regimes from government on public transport for their staff, recognising that within those requirements for mask wearing on public transport, there are exemptions, and there are exemptions that apply to customers and also exemptions that apply to drivers. So the operators are very well aware of those guidelines, and we engage with them on a regular basis when those guidelines are updated to make sure they are aware of them and understand them. But we have no authority to enforce mask compliance. That is the purview of the New Zealand Police only in New Zealand at the moment.
So, Stuart, if a supplementary question, if I may, just is there any monitoring of that situation? For example, wearing of masks on buses, and then whose responsibility is it apart from the police? Is there not some way within our policy that in fact that can be addressed?
No. So we do not have the authority vested to us by New Zealand government to enforce mask compliance. Only the New Zealand Police have been given that authority by the government. So the guidance is very clear. We cannot refuse people who are not wearing a mask on a bus. We must carry them. The driver cannot refuse entry or carriage. The operator cannot refuse entry or carriage, and we cannot instruct them to refuse entry or carriage.
Thank you, Stuart. Graham McGlynn, followed by Ian McKenzie.
Through you, Chair. Stuart helpfully pointed us towards the bus driver retention, which I'd highlighted, and we have a economic situation with a tight labour market and more favourable wage rates elsewhere. And we have a resulting driver shortage. So I've got sort of 2 or 3 questions that I'll package together for comment. First one is where a service is not provided. I'm assuming that there is an adjustment in the payments made to the operator. Secondly, do we have any exposure if the operators have to increase their wage rates to drivers to attract them to fulfil their contracts? Do we have an exposure there within our existing contracts?
So in terms of the first question, yes, the performance regime for our public transport contracts does consider a scenario where services are not run for whatever reason, in which case we don't pay for those services. So that's already in place. In terms of your second question, the answer to that is a conditional yes. Within our contracts, where there is legislation change that imposes additional cost on an operator, we are expected to contribute to fund that cost increase. So, for example, the request from Minister of Transport for a living wage adjustment, while that wasn't a legislative change, it was a strong request from government, which we complied with and incurred additional cost. When the Employment Relations Act legislation changed that imposed a significant cost increase for operators and a significant cost increase, therefore, for all public transport authorities in New Zealand and Waka Kotahi NZTA. So in terms of driver wages, where an operator needs to maintain or attract resource to operate their services, there is an expectation from operators that we will help to assist in that outcome.
Thank you, Stuart. Ian McKenzie.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I gone back to the recommendations from the Auditor General, in particular recommendation 3, and then you flick through to the table on page 66, which talks. This isn't a question for Stuart. This is more a comment about ECAN's responsibility here. But you flip through to the table on page 66, which shows our patronage, bus patronage, and I can't help but think that we're trying to operate a significant and expensive service as business as usual in extraordinary circumstances, which I don't think are likely to change because of COVID over the near or medium term future. And I just think that we need as a council to review our strategy on public transport delivery, especially in light of the recommendations from the Auditor General.
Thank you for the comment. I won't ask Stuart to reply. I do have a quick question. In the COVID risk, you made an assumption as to the 1st of November. I'm not sure that you can give me an answer beyond that because none of us really know, but do you have any feeling of where finance might travel given where we sit today?
Well, it really depends on when the traffic light system proposed by government comes into place. If Canterbury remains with little or no COVID activity, one would assume we would go to a green status. The green status doesn't require mask compliance on public transport, as I understand it. So we would expect to see increased engagement with public transport as a result of that outcome. But as Councillor McKenzie has highlighted and you've alluded to, it really is an unknown. All we can do is look at what's happened, and we note that from the first COVID lockdown, when we came out of that, patronage bounced back to around about 80% of pre-COVID levels, and then we went into another COVID lockdown. So we don't really have a historical reference base to use to anticipate what might happen in the future and how the community might react.
Thank you, Stuart. One last short question from Councillor Edge before we move on.
The risk areas, holidays amendment bill, is the information on that and the effects of that likely to be able to come to us in preparation of the annual plan?
Unlikely, and the reason I say that is there are some conversations that need to be had on a national basis for the public transport industry to help to understand what an appropriate consistent response might be across the country, similar to what was done for the Employment Relations Act changes. So trying to understand what the real impact of this legislative change will be, recognising that sick leave only incurs a cost to organisations when it is consumed. It's not like annual leave. And so while the provisions have changed from a minimum of 5 days to a minimum of 10 days, of course, not everyone takes their 10 days sick leave every year, and that's certainly the case in our organisation. So there's some work to do and some conversations to be had to understand what the implications of this legislative change is, what any potential cost imposts might be, and how we might measure that and therefore fund it in a consistent way across operators around the country.
Thank you, Stuart. If there are no further questions, and I won't allow any anyway, could I have someone please move that we receive the financial update on public transport? Grant Hedge, Vicky Southworth. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. We now move to item 7.2, Portfolio Finance Report for September 2021. Tasha.
Morena. The portfolio performance report is reporting on the numbers from July to September. We have a small operating deficit currently at the moment. So this is tracking for the first 3 months. There have been some delays in some programs with COVID-19 and a few other changes within the portfolios. Are there any particular questions on this report?
Graham McGlynn.
Thank you for the report and the drafting. My question relates on page 73, where you've got a summary at paragraph 7 of the various portfolios and their performance. Question is, do these variances indicate any indicators of potential forthcoming failure issues to deliver on our statement of service performance and our annual plan and our outcomes really for ratepayers that the ratepayers are expecting?
There'll be a following on to my report, a report around the performance and levels of service, and that will be covered there. My understanding at this stage is while we have had some delays, most portfolios are confident that they will deliver their work for this year.
Thank you. No further questions. Then could I please have someone move that we receive the portfolio finance report for the period ending 30 September 2021. Thank you, Graham McGlynn. Ian McKenzie, second. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We move then to item 7.3, financial health report. Tasha again.
So following on from the portfolio, this report is really just covering off our cash position, our debtors and capex. Is there any questions on this report?
There appear to be none. It is self-explanatory given where we've come from. So thank you. Could I have someone then please move that we receive the monthly financial health report and note the table of council expenditure. Thank you, Chair. Yui, Graham McGlynn, second. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Wonderful. We move then to item 7.4. And this is a paper that I asked be brought to this committee and hopefully then on to full council to give us all as elected members an understanding of our policies as to what we borrow for, why we borrow, how we borrow, our ceilings, our limits, and potential implications if we went out and borrowed a significant amount of money as to how it might feel. So really pleased to see the paper here, and hand back to Tasha.
Thank you. So this report is really just giving you an update on where we're sitting currently with our borrowing, that we've got at the moment a number of tranches. They have maturity dates over different periods, and that's part of our debt management strategy. We work with Bancorp and they provide advice around our treasury policy and around how we manage our debt. I guess the key things to note in this report is just that interest rates are starting to rise and that we need to have that awareness. John, who's sitting here, is our treasury manager, and he works closely with Bancorp whenever our debt tranches come up for renewal, and they're always looking at our balance between our fixed and our floating rates. There's an example in this report for you to consider, and just to give you further information that if you're wanting, if there was a need to borrow further, what it would look like and the implications. So the key things that we need to be aware of when borrowing is our level of service and our Fitch credit rating. For the last 2 years, we have carried an excellent rating of AA+. If we were to borrow to a much more substantial level, it may impact our level of service 37, which is to maintain a Fitch credit rating of AA or equivalent. So that is always something to bear in mind. But if we were at all to wanting to borrow further, and especially at a higher rate, then we would get specialist advice as to how to structure that debt and how that would work going forward as far as impacting our cash flow and our rates.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah. Chair Yui, Glenn.
Thanks very much for the report, by the way, and thanks, Chair, for asking for this report. I think this is what we need, so thank you very much. It's good. It's very clear. I've just got a question to ask around the one recommendation that we're going to. Number one, notes the council will receive environment treasury policy during the annual plan process. I'm just wondering, with regard to that work that we'll receive around reviewing it, how much detail will we have of other councils' policies in that? For example, we just heard about the Fitch rating. I think it would be illustrative if we could know what the Fitch rating is on Wellington with 400, with 81.1% of, anyway, Wellington Council, Bay of Plenty, and maybe just those other ones, just to have a look at what has happened to their Fitch rating, where they've got more loan debt than borrowing than we have. It seemed to me, being involved in the Fitch discussion the year before last, that I think Fitch is an international organisation that isn't going to be easily upset in terms of its rating, given the level of rating we've got, borrowing we've got now, and our income compared with other councils. But anyway, I'm just wondering if the material we can get can give us some more comparative stuff like that, and also around the other councils' actual policies, so we can see what they are. So were we planning to do that? And then I've got another question after that. So yes.
Through the chair, yeah, I can confirm that we will include information on other councils' policies. If other councils obtain a credit rating, then we will provide that as well. Obviously, it's a voluntary process that this council has chosen to engage in. Not all councils will complete the rating, so if they are available, then certainly we will provide that information as part of our process.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just leave the other questions to other people.
Graham, followed by Grant.
Thanks for this report.
Oh, sorry. No problems. Through you, Chair, we've got a tranche at 3.875 maturing next month, and I note at point 21 that we've got the cash in the bank. I'm assuming that we won't be redrawing that down, which will, at least in the short term, lower our average interest costs and coming, or have we got some other plans to replace that?
So we have a regular internal treasury committee. We considered this issue explicitly. We will be getting advice on the best way to manage that repayment, and one of those options is, as you've said, not to take further borrowing and to use the cash, but it's something that we need to look at in the context of the longer term cash flow implications for the council.
Right.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for this report. I kind of looking a bit following on from Chair's comments about comparative information. I just draw our attention to page 108 of our long-term plan, and two issues that I have raised before during the long-term plan as well is our limits and our self-imposed quantified limit for rates, for example, is 5%. And it was indicated in the LTP that that was unrealistic, and that also needed to be looked at and raised, I suspect. I think I'm just drawing staff's attention to something that I'll be looking for in the annual plan discussions. And related to that, on that same page is a diagram showing the debt borrowing self-imposed limit based on current local government funding authority. And our limit was is really quite low at the moment, but we can have a limit of no more than 280% total of rate income. And when we look at that chart on page 90, at the moment we only have 32%. So we have an incredible amount of room to move on our borrowing. And I'm just really keen to see what the implications of that are, how far we can go, because at the moment we I think can go a lot more. So I'll be interested later on to see what we can do with that under all scenarios. Also looking potentially at the redefining, so that's basically adjustments to the financial policy and the Treasury policy, and looking at perhaps redefining what's meant by natural capital, which bothers me a little bit in terms of that definition. But obviously we'll have to look at that.
Thank you. Becky, followed by Claire.
Yeah, just on the Fitch rating, it was just heard that we don't have to have Fitch, or some councils don't have it. So 2 questions really. One is, why do we have it? Is it beneficial, and how much does it cost, and is it value for money doing a Fitch rating? There's a few.
I can answer part of that, but I think John will give you the cost. It's beneficial in terms of it provides an external indicator to the wider market, if you like, of the creditworthiness of the organisation. So it's having that independent barometer of our financial health. The council obviously chose to do that. I am unaware of the decision, and I'm unaware of the cost, although John should be able to provide that information.
Thanks, Mark. It also enables us to have cheaper debt as well, about 20 basis points of all our new borrowing. It was a decision made. Costs approximately about 48,000 a year. That's the cost of and a fair bit of staff time in terms of very thorough annual reviews.
So if you look, can you estimate how much saving there is in having access to a lower percentage rate, if I'm understanding right, versus that cost of plus the staff time is also important, because there's an opportunity cost there, presumably.
Like I said, it's 20 basis points. So we're looking at, say, borrowing $10 million. You're saving $20,000 for every time you take out a new tranche, compared to unrated councils. That's a direct cost saving.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just a little bit of background for audit, finance and risk. This was undertaken during the COVID period, and it was while I was, I think, acting. I don't think I was confirmed yet, but it was sometime in that period. And we agreed to go forward with it at the time for a couple of reasons. One was that we felt that we were in the midst of the LTP and there were considerable pressures on this organisation. So to be able to, if you like, weatherproof the organisation with that level of quality assurance. And what was interesting at the time, and Chair Huey was part of that korero, was that some of the questions were also about our ability to manage COVID as a country. They actually felt that we were at a high rating in that, and also as a council and working in that space. So there was a little bit of that. A further comment as to the why is that as we're heading into a very significant change in terms of the role of local government, particularly in terms of assets, and I'm thinking Three Waters, and the need for borrowing in the future, having those credit ratings was also deemed a relevant assessment to make. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll say sorry, Phil and Graham, on this one, unless it's really, really important, just in time of trying to get through. Very quick.
Just did a quick calculation off 73 million and the cost is 6 basis points versus saving of 20 basis points.
Thank you for that. I will then ask therefore a mover and seconder for noting that the council will review its treasury policy through the annual plan and notes which items can be borrowed under our current treasury policy and borrowing requirements. So I have a mover, please. Thank you, Claire. Seconded, Chair Yui. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. I'm just aware of time and I have some business I would like to get through with Chief Executive. What, do you have a timeline?
So, Chair, I will stay longer, noting that you want that. I'm conscious of time. I will prioritise this, but as soon as the item is finished, I will leave it.
I just hope to have you in the room if I can.
Understood.
Thank
Understood.
you. We move then to item 7.5. Reserves and Capex. Tasha.
This paper, I'm highlighting here that we have made an error in our year-end process in a capital journal, which is a transfer between our asset replacement reserve and our capital reserve. There's no impact on our operating result. It is purely a transfer between our reserves. But what this transfer does is it takes our net asset movement for the year, which is our asset purchases, less our disposals and our depreciation. It moves it to the asset replacement reserve, which is in effect is our cash position of how we should purchase our capital items that are not specific to a reserve, like public transport or catchment or a debt funded. So we have missed this journal for the last 2 years and once prior to that. There's also been an inconsistent approach to this journal in the last 7 years that we've gone back and reviewed. So the impact of that is that our asset replacement reserve is now in deficit by 2.5 million, which means we have spent more on capital expenditure in the last couple of years than we have recovered through depreciation. We're also highlighting at this point that we need to do more work in our capital expenditure planning and that we will be looking at developing a detailed plan as part of the annual plan. Also noting that we don't have full documentation of our year-end process, which does create a risk, and that we think that it is prudent that we develop a plan to replenish our reserves. Are there any specific questions on this paper?
I guess I'll ask the obvious one. You've kind of covered it. So what is what is. So yeah, really that plan to ensure that going forward we have those corrections in place and actions.
We have now fully documented this process and spread, I guess, the knowledge within our teams further of what needs to happen and included it within our year-end files.
And I guess my second question, is the audit tour aware of these issues?
Sorry, I missed
the auditor for process-wise.
Not at this point. I wanted to bring it to the meeting today and then I'll forward it on to them either this afternoon or tomorrow.
Thank you. Graham McGlynn.
Through the chair, you've asked the question about the audit. I would suggest that we have a recommendation 11 there that the council requests that the auditor be made aware of this matter as at the earliest juncture, given the pressures that we have on year-end processes. This is the sort of thing that could derail a timetable.
Thank you. Graham Naylor.
Chair, can I suggest we also advise the auditor of the corrective actions that have been taken in documenting the processes so it won't happen again.
We'll just go through our conversation and
I'd need some clarification of wording. Sorry, I didn't catch it.
perhaps if I may, through the chair, suggest for note 11 that the committee requires the accounting team to notify the auditors of this matter and the corrective actions that have been taken.
Just slow down a bit, right?
Yep.
Go back to notify the
Auditors of the issue and the corrective steps that have been taken to incorporate. That last one is just to incorporate Graham Naylor's comments.
Can we just, I guess, with your permission, just add in a timeline as of today, tomorrow, or immediately as to what immediately is? Yes. Thank you.
Maybe put the immediately after the word auditors. It's a goal to suggest.
Cool. Thank you. We can then deal with that when we come to that point. Any further, yeah, Grant Edge?
Just a quick observation. It's really good. I'm really good to hear that you're looking at some further work on transparency of capital expenditure against projects. It will be very valuable and informative for our communities to understand where money is being spent and what stage various projects might be at. So that's great.
Ian Cranwell has his hand up.
Kia ora, Tasha. Just regards this, is there a policy regarding this? And if so, do we need to upgrade it or have one? Because it's, you know, as you said, it's been missed for the last 2 years, and then you've gone back 7 years. So just a comment on that, please.
So we do have a reserves funding policy that sets the limits of our reserves. And so this era has meant that we've gone into deficit of our asset replacement reserve. It should have a limit of 4 million and we're now in deficit of 2.3. In terms of do we have a policy of how this works, not so much a policy, but it's around that documentation of our year-end processes. And so that's what we have now completed as part of the review that we've done on these reserve balances and this transaction process.
Giles.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Tasha has said, whilst we don't have a formal policy, clearly within the annual report and accounts there are a set of accounting policies that we follow, and as part of that we need to comply with accounting standards that are relevant to New Zealand public sector. And one of the key principles of accounting is that you are consistent between years. And so as part of that, the process that's been adopted should be consistent across the years. And if we change those processes, we would disclose that in a change to our accounting policies.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, can I just seek clarification? So recommendation 11, do we have to do anything special or we can just add it in and go through?
We would to, so this was going to be my suggestion. Amendment is moved and seconded, carried, becomes part of the substantive motion, and then we do the whole thing. That's good.
So yeah, I mean, just clarify again. So we have 10 items sitting in there. They all sit individually. So the 11th item.
So we need a move and a second for our amendment.
So is it an amendment?
That's
given they're all individuals.
It's an amendment.
It's an amendment. Okay. So we move in second for the amendment, becomes part of, then becomes part of the substantive motion, and all 11 can then be put as one. Thank you. And I think I just had a quick request from Giles that the committee requires the Chief Financial Officer, CFO, as opposed to accounting team. If we could just change that to Chief Financial Officer, acting. Cool, thank you. Could I then have someone move and second that we move this amendment. Graham McGlynn, Graham Naylor move and second the amendment. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. It now becomes part of the substantive motion, those items being 1 through 11, and I won't read them through. You have all read your papers. Could I have someone then please move that we move them as a block? Graham McGlynn and Chair Yui. Any further conversation? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you for that. That's provided some clarity there. We move then to item 7.6. Portfolio performance report, first quarter, July through to September. And the reason for this, I guess, report being in here is the challenge of some of that reporting sitting in the strategy, the other committee, regional leadership, those folk, and a responsibility for us for that financial reporting. So majority of councillors will have seen it already, but I hand over to Catherine Short.
Thank you, councillors. Yes, you will have seen this report before, most of you, in the Regional and Strategic Leadership Committee recently, where we had a really good discussion about it. But as Councillor Sunkel says, it is here today as part of the performance reporting to complete that sort of process. And just to note that the next quarter report will come to this committee again in March next year. So we will keep bringing the performance report through to this council, this committee.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Graham McGlynn.
Across the report, there are a number of items that we're noting that we will not achieve or are at risk. Rather than going through them all, are there any generic themes that this committee should be aware of?
I note that Tasha did say that staff are confident that the work programs are tracking as we expected. There are some things beyond our control, and specifically the one that won't be achieved was where we had a very stiff target. The other ones are at risk, and we're tracking them and managing them. And I suppose the two overriding things that staff are seeing is the COVID-19, the delays caused by COVID-19, and the tight labour market, both of which will not be a surprise to you, but that they are having an impact on work programs.
Are there any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And I think this is something I really want to highlight as Chief Executive. There are multiple things happening at the moment. It's the COVID impacts. It's the realities of the labour market. It's the fact that we're actually going to go into a traffic light system, which this country hasn't seen before in the context of COVID being in our community. And there will be an impact of that in one form or another. And I come back to the earlier korero with regard to mental health, and I think that will have an impact. And then lastly, there is considerable discomfort amongst staff across local government at the moment due to the Three Waters reforms and the transitions and the signals with regard to RM reform and local government reform. And I think we do need to, and I have shared this with full council before, when we go into our annual plan conversations, the notions of affordability and doability do need to be front and center, because what we're encountering from 2022 onwards will be different challenges, but continued challenges. The ability to remain resilient and sustain effort amongst that level of demand will wax and wane. And the key tonga for us remain, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata, our people. So my own view is you have an update now, but I think some of the risks upcoming are actually undercooked here. And I would really like to have a further korero with audit, finance and risk in that space. Thank you, Chair.
Graham McGlynn.
That was what I was alluding to through the chair, and it is another big issue I suspect that's sitting there that wasn't mentioned, which is supply chain, which is outside our control, which is diabolical at the moment.
Councillor Clearwater, do you have a question? No? Oh, not this time. Oh, you've had your chance. Good. Are there any further questions? If there are not, could I then have someone please move that we note the information in the performance portfolio performance report and note the minor amendments to this report? So move by Councillor Edge, seconded Councillor. You put your hand up, Southworth. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Don't. Yeah, this is like an auction. Just don't move. Done. We now move. This is the end of the public agenda. Might I just ask we take a long 2-minute break, stretch our legs, and come back in, and then move into audits and to the public excluded. Thank you. Yeah. I'm happy with everything. So that's probably up to I've got, it's a great. The question, right at the it goes so that we get it done and then. Thank you. Clears it out and then it's free. Giles could have answered the question, but I think I read the email, so I just I'm trying to get you into the conversation. No, I think. Thank you. And we're quite far off time. Okay. Very low in terms of scholarship. They just know it's just for people. It's just that they'll come back. Yeah, we're just. Yeah. I was going to. But we shouldn't put this reserves policy review alongside this in terms of the audit plan, because that very large.
The recording's still going, guys, and the mics are picking up a lot of conversation.
Thank you, Nicole. Apologies. One of the microphones was.
No, it's fine. Just, yeah, making sure it's not on the recording.
Thank you. We have a process for bringing items that have been in the publicly excluded part of an agenda out into the open meeting when they need to be. We had a request for some information about the Odeon Theatre and Lorien Wilson building. And so we went through a process of, as outlined in our standing orders, of reviewing which items were suitable to come out and which still needed to remain in. And part of our standing orders is that once those items have been released, then we need to notify the meeting that that has happened. And since some of those items were considered within what was previously park performance audit and risk, we're bringing it to this meeting. And some of the items were considered within the council meeting. And so this item is also going to the council meeting on the 25th to notify them as well for those items. So this is a notification that the information listed in the paper has been brought out of publicly excluded.
Thank you for that. I keep looking at it going, yep, that's publicly excluded, and forgot about it twice in a row. So the in going forward in our recommendations in public excluded, we will make I guess an informed decision as to recommendations that might sit, so that we don't get into this position of going at XY time or at the chief executive's prerogative, they may be released. Is that what we're looking to try and achieve for the future?
Yes, and I'm in the process of drawing up a mechanism for doing that. Unfortunately, I haven't done it for these ones in the paper today, but we will actually in future have an item. At the moment, we have one item that says all the items in publicly excluded stay in, but actually each item needs to identify what is the trigger for it to come out of publicly excluded. And so at the moment, we haven't been doing that step, and so we've had to take them out individually. Part of a work plan that my team will be doing over January is to go back through the PX items and see which ones are appropriate to be available for the public domain now, and what would be the criteria for the remainder to come out, so that we actually are more prepared for when we receive these type of queries.
Thank you, because I'm aware of the Civil Defence PX meeting, which was to appoint the controller, and the simple note said this remains in PX until the press release goes out at 8 AM tomorrow morning. So which then,
yes.
So just those abilities in those papers to put a timeline of the like in. Thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, then could I please have someone move and second the recommendation that we receive this notification? Chair Yui, Grant Edge, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. That has now cleared that up. We now move to public excluded. And the reasons have been articulated. Public meeting. Public excluded business has finished. Cool. We are back in the public meeting. We have decided not to talk about public excluded business to come out at this point. There are no notices of motion. Extraordinary or urgent business? None. Our next meeting will be held in early 2022 unless required earlier. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your all attendance. This has been a bit of a marathon to get through. Councillor Mackay, would you like to finish? We can close it after Ian's one, if we get there to start it. Straight in. Yeah, we'll swap seats. Thank you all for your time.